John.
Okay.
Just start.
So, welcome everybody to day 5 of SCW Digital Week. Today's digital lunchtime webinar, we'll be discussing innovation and future vision. And hello, my name is John O'Connell. I'm the Director of Strategic and Service Innovation, responsible for leading the development of SCW's approach to strategic and service innovation. And this means for me, working collaboratively with senior leaders from across the NHS. And we work within SCW to define methodologies to adopt and to ensure innovation is embedded into the ways that we work within SCW. But most importantly for me, it's an opportunity for me to work collaboratively with our system leaders to identify what they see as the system priorities and areas they would like innovation to focus on. So I'm really delighted to, on this call, joining with me on today's session, we've got Wendy Marshall, our Head of Strategic and Service Innovation. Hi, Wendy. We've also got with us Tom Council, our Deputy Director of Research and Development.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tom. And finally, we've got Michael Knight, our Informatics Portfolio Director. Welcome, Michael.
Hi.
So some housekeeping before we begin. If you want to pose a question during this live session, you can use the Ask a Question feature, which I believe is on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you can't see this feature, you can also click Show Q&A button at the top right of your screen, which you can ask questions anonymously if you want. And during this session, our moderators will publish as many questions as possible. So please do keep asking them. If you see a question under the Features tab that you think is a particularly good question, please do like it, give it a thumbs up. That way we'll be able to get to those questions quite quickly and make sure we're focusing on the right subjects. And any questions that we don't get time to answer this afternoon, we'll of course follow up and share these on our website. So going forward, we're going to be recording this session. So if you do like it, please do share this with your peers. And now I'd like to introduce what we're going to be talking about. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So for anybody who's tried to implement innovation within a business, this session is going to cover off what I class as some of the key challenges, some of the best practice approaches. We're also going to be introducing what we see as the innovation cycle and some really sort of innovative delivery approaches that we've used within SCW. Plus, we're going to talk about some of the exciting current innovation programs we're working with and that we have underway. So I hope, from your perspective, you find the session really engaging, thought-provoking, and you get some helpful takeaways that you can apply and consider working with, using within your own organisation. And finally, at the end, what I'm going to do is summarise at the end of the day with some Q&A and some helpful takeaway features as well. So if we go to the next slide. So just to set the context for today, what I thought I'd do is just talk about some of the current NHS challenges that we have. And the first one is just looking at something called multimorbidity. It's kind of seen as one of the defining challenges that we have of our time. Healthcare delivery is built predominantly and remained centred around the treatment of a single disease. And if you look at these 3 bullet points, there's quite some alarming stuff there. The number of people in England currently with 4 conditions is predicted to double. And that's going to be between 2015 and 2035, which is almost double the current prevalence, which is quite alarming. And then finally, if you look at the bottom bullet point there, multimorbidity, this does increase the likelihood of hospital admission, length of stay, but more importantly, it raises healthcare costs across the whole of a system. From a patient perspective, it reduces their quality of life and increases their dependency on what we class as polypharmacy, and sadly raises the risk of mortality. So some big challenges we've got there. If we move into the second slide, please. Yeah. So this is a really interesting report that was published by the Health Foundation. And I guess what made me quite surprised was to read that as little as 10% of the population's health and well-being is linked to accessing healthcare, and the rest being sort of shaped by socioeconomic factors. And perhaps not surprisingly, when you look at the illustrating on the right-hand side that shows influence compared to kind of national health expenditure, with only 7% being spent on healthy behaviours. So it's clear to me when you look at this that perhaps our current model isn't going to be sustainable and isn't probably going to get us where we need to be into the future. And due to COVID as well, health inequalities and have increased and not got better as such. So something we need to follow up. So what I'd like to do, if you go to the next slide, please, is just to take a bit of a look back into the past. And this is a sort of headline that came through in the Times of London back in 1894, where it said that in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of manure. So I guess the headline's not kind of unlike what I just discussed really about, 2035, approximately 70% of our population will have 4 or more chronic conditions. So that's quite alarming in its own right. So they had an equally alarming thing. So what happened? So in short, this story was something you may have heard before, but in the 1800s, large cities across the world were literally drowning in horse manure due to their dependency on horses for transport, for goods, traveling people around the city. And the spread of sort of diseases like typhoid and other diseases created significant health population problems for the population. And government leaders at the time met many times to try and explore how to solve this crisis, but they had no answers to the solution. And it was seen as a huge big problem. But however, by 1912, this seemingly sort of insurmountable problem had been resolved. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and the petrol engine saved the day. And horses were replaced by motorized vehicles that became then the new mode of transport and carriage. However, you could argue that equally the petrol engine now is undergoing its own revolution due to the impact it's taken on our environment. So you've got clean fuel and a big push for sustainable electric cars. But if you take this and look in the context of what the challenge I outlined at the very beginning, I believe that innovation and innovation practice, specifically the application of digital healthcare technologies, genomics, digital medicine, artificial intelligence, data analytics and robotics, I think will help us save our days. So I think we need to think about how carefully we can sort of respond using those new technologies to a similar challenge that we face today. So if we go to the next slide. And then if you think about, the need to rethink innovation, and this was some sort of research that we picked up, and it says in the first one that 40% of Fortune 500 companies in 1999 were no longer there 10 years later. And I believe before the outbreak of COVID, this had reduced down to around about sort of 2 years, and in some instances, in some industries, 6 months. And I would dare to guess that it's probably down even further now. And efficiency and the drive for efficiency is good and it's released benefit, but I think it's no longer enough. We need to do things differently because the system clearly isn't working. But from an SCW perspective, we need to ensure that we grow and we add new value and we survive as an organization and add different value into the system. So innovation is now expected as a right, and we need to be staying relevant to our customers. We need to think about how to do things differently and bring in new value. So it's just some really interesting 4 or 5 areas there to have a look at in the context of why innovation is important. If we go to the next slide, please. And I don't know if people have come across this. This is something called Amira's Law that was coined by an American scientist called Roy Amara. Roy was a prominent futurist, and he basically stated that people tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run, but really underestimate it in the long run. So kind of what does that mean for us? So if you look at this model here that was developed by Gartner, it clearly really illustrates how that sort of works. And an illustration of Amira's Law working in today is looking at artificial intelligence. There's predictions and headlines about the short-term applications of AI, the hype, how extensive it is. However, when it comes to the future, there's real concern about the uncertainty in organizations, where to begin and how to employ it. So, the innovation around AI has gone up through the peak. And then when it doesn't get delivered quick enough, you enter what you class as the trough of disillusionment. And then over time, when people get used to new technologies, you reach that plateau of productivity. And this is where I see innovation playing a really key critical role to help reduce the peak somewhat and take the hype out of some of these things, but also not allow us necessarily to go too far into that trough of disillusionment. If we go to the next slide, please. So how do you do that? So we did some research within SCW. And we sort of did a lot of research, and we came across this model from Gartner, which is really, really powerful. It allows us to do 2 things. It allows us to explore new opportunities on one side, but equally go through a process that helps us when we get out the other side to have something that's sustainable and we can exploit within a scalable business. So how it works is, in the first piece is looking at something called design thinking, exploring the customer problem. ideating with a customer, is the problem pervasive? Is it something that we really need to tackle? Then when we've agreed and scoped that out, we move to the second phase, and it's something called Lean Startup. And I really recommend a book by Eric Ries that he wrote called Lean Startup. And what it allows you to do is, and the idea here is not to develop a fully functioning product or service or solution. It allows you to develop what he classes as a concierge model. It's something that looks and acts and feels the way you'd expect something to work. And the benefit of this is you can test with your systems and your services and your customers that, is this kind of what you're looking for? Would it work? And then when you've got that buy-in, you then move to the agile phase that helps you then bridge the gap between the innovation and the core business. This allows you to, using agile methodology, to have multiple sprints to start doing releases. And the benefit of this is that you get very quickly, you can get products and services through this, but you'll pivot as you go along. Some solutions and innovations that you come up with will fail, but you'll fail fast. You won't waste time and effort, but you'll get out the other side something that is hopefully scalable and aligned to customer needs going forward. If we go to the next slide, please. But coupled with that model, we also need to think about how we apply innovation. And these were sort of 5 areas that we came to sort of settle on, which is driven by the 10 types of innovation by Larry Keeley. And it talks about, innovation requires identifying problems that really matter to your systems and your customers, but moving through them in a systematic manner to deliver elegant solutions. But if you take the second point on there, tackling the hardest problems first, don't just look for low-hanging fruit. It's appealing to do that, but instead you need to really sort of focus your efforts on the big, gnarly problems that are not easy to answer. Some of the problems I talked about in the very, very beginning, the couple of challenges. And remember, it's not about you, it's about solving the deeper problems within healthcare systems. And refusing incomplete answers as well. It takes a while, but don't be comfortable with ambiguity and wait for the answers to emerge. And the fourth one, I think, which is really, really important as well, innovation is good, but it really doesn't count until it's sort of landed in the space that's helped your system leaders or your stakeholders do something new in a better way, but is also equally sustainable over time. So where are we aiming to try and get to? If you go to the next slide, please. So we've set up an innovations and solutions board within SCW that we test these ideas, because they're not just mine or my team's ideas, but we have to test them on sort of 4 fronts. And the first one is looking at desirability, looking at, do our system leaders really want what we're talking about? Viability, should we do this? What's the risk of developing this, and does it outweigh the benefits? And then we finally move around to sort of feasibility. Can we do this? We all like to think we can do many, many things, but there's perhaps skills within organizations that we need to look at outside of NHS, which is partnerships with industry. So this is really a call to think about, if it's something really, really new, we can bring partners and bring industry in to help solve that problem. And the last thing is then a strategic alignment, making sure it fits with what our organizational goals are. There's no point in us innovating in an area of not our expertise and where we want to go. So it's like us opening up a pharmacy. If that's not the area, we wouldn't waste necessarily time. So it really helps us focus our efforts. If we go into the next slide. So what does this mean for businesses going forward? And it's looking at AI for business. So AI can be defined. There's a piece of research that was done by 2 chaps, Thomas Davenport and Rajiv Ranaki in Harvard, where they looked at AI and they said, well, where's the real benefit coming through? And the research pointed to sort of 3 ways that AI is helping businesses improve. And the first one is something called cognitive automation, and that was 40% of the projects that they scanned, 152 of them, but 47 of the projects were focused on cognitive automation, which helps improve business processes. And you're going to hear more from that from Wendy. The second one, where they had 37% of the focus, was something called cognitive insights. And this is gaining new insights using data analysis, the likes of machine learning and AI. And then the final piece there is looking at something called cognitive engagement. And this is engaging with both your customers, engaging with your employees in a unique way. We are working in that areas, and more will probably follow on the other webinars for that. But they're 3 big areas that we think that are really worth looking at and focusing on. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'm pleased now to introduce Wendy, who's going to talk about cognitive automation. Over to you, Wendy.
Thanks. So what exactly is cognitive automation? It's based on software bringing intelligence to information-intensive processes, and is commonly associated with RPA, or robotic processing automation. This all sounds very clever, but what does it mean? What does it really mean? In SCW, we've been using some off-the-shelf RPA software applications like UiPath and Blue Prism to automate transactional processes, as well as collaborating with best-of-class technical partners to connect organisations throughout their health and social care systems and their often individualised working practices and systems in order to deliver new and innovative ways of working. Could we have the next slide, please? So what exactly is RPA? I think most people these days will have heard of Excel macros and understand the concept of them. RPA works on a similar concept and is essentially the automation of processes through the creation of a multi-application macro. So in essence, and like an Excel macro, we use software like, for example, UiPath to record a set of actions like retrieve attachments from emails and Outlook and save them into a specific folder, populate a spreadsheet from whatever was contained in those attachments, and then create a report based on the populated spreadsheet. And then finally send that newly created spreadsheet to a defined number of users. Could we have the next slide, please? RPA delivers so many benefits, but the core benefit of RPA is that it automates many key business tasks, freeing up staff to focus on more fulfilling work. RPA will inevitably change the nature of our work by complementing us rather than replacing us. So as far as AI technologies go, RPA is the least expensive, the easiest to implement, and typically brings the biggest returns on investment. It's also the least smart in the sense that the applications aren't programmed to learn and improve, only continuously repeat the task it has been trained to do. So looking in more detail about the benefits that bots, RPA bots that is, can deliver, they can ensure compliance because bots can only perform the tasks they've been created to do. So if they've been created to ensure regulatory compliance within a set of specific rules, they will follow that process to a T and provide an audit trail to evidence those actions. They can improve management capabilities by freeing up time usually spent on more transactional processes. This will allow time and space to gain greater understanding of complex challenges. Too often we become bogged down in detail and can't see the wood for the trees, and this is particularly true in finance. Doing and reviewing often means you're unable to step back and see what insight is being presented and actually whether it really makes sense at all. It can also improve patient experience. By improving processes and communications and enabling remote monitoring through automation, this will help reduce waiting and response times and improve the overall patient experience. RPA is flexible, so end-to-end processes are already automated in one hit. Similarly to macros, bots can be edited and added to at a later date. And because bots work in the background and don't alter or disrupt other systems, they are completely scalable. They're also agile because they'll do the same actions every time. They're not prone to error and they can run continuously 24/7. Could we have the next slide, please? Before joining SCW 7 years ago, I'd collated over 25 years of experience in business development and whole system improvement from a diverse array of blue chip and SME commercial organisations. I suppose in brief, this meant understanding the businesses and then improving end-to-end processes using the latest technology in order to get from A to B in the most efficient and effective way or make best use of the resources that we had. On joining the NHS, it became increasingly obvious to me that NHS processes were made to be automated. But as with most other organisations, RPA will never be successful unless people are supported to gain confidence in the technology and they actually understand the benefits it can bring to both them and the organisation. This is true throughout the whole organisation, regardless of position. RPA is best suited to routine, repetitive, time-consuming and rule-based processes. And so examples of processes that are commonly automated are things like in HR, starters and leavers, payroll processing, in finance, account reconciliations, routine financial reporting, IT, it could be user setup and configuration, and in commissioning, it could even be contract compliance. History tells us that sooner or later we will ask ourselves how RPA can help our lives become easier. So thinking along these lines, I'd like you to consider what you would automate if you could automate anything. This could be referring to your personal life or at work. And what would you do with that time that it gave you back? And could you put your comments into the chat, please? And we'll come back to these a little bit later. I've often thought about this and my own life, and I've come to a conclusion that if I could automate anything, it would probably be my teenage son. He's 17 and he's programmed to make as much noise as possible when I want to sleep and lay in bed when we've arranged to go out. It's all very routine and repetitive, so perfect. So between midnight to around 2 a.m, I say, can you go to bed please, at least a dozen times. Between midday to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I say, can you get out of bed please, at least a dozen times. And so what would I do at that time I got back? Well, I'd actually sleep maybe myself and maybe go out for the day somewhere just for a change. To give you some time to think about this yourself, we'll take a look at your suggestions at the end. Could I have the next slide, please? This is an example of a successful automation, and we've called him Mickey. This is an example of an end-to-end process for one of our finance tasks. It's done on day 1 of every month and 12 months every year. It involves collating Excel files from Outlook and SharePoint and saving them down into a specific folder each month, copying and pasting the contents of those files into another Excel workbook systematically, one by one, running an Excel macro for each file individually to identify what entries are valid and those that are not. The invalid entries are removed by a filter. Narrative is added to the valid entries, and then these are then systematically copied and pasted into a journal template. The journal template is then uploaded into Oracle and then finally approved. Our approach wasn't to try and automate the whole process at once, so that we encourage confidence in that technology. So we broke it up into 3 steps. As you can see, step 1, it covers the saving down of the files, and this was actually left as it was. Step 2, which is the bulk of the process, and actually took the most time, it deals with the copying and pasting and adding narrative, and this is the bit that was automated. Step 3, the posting the journal into Oracle and the approval, that also is left as it is. This is actually quite a simple automation, and in time, steps 1 and 3 will also be automated to release further efficiencies. This process has to be done by every organisation that uses ISFE. So that's around 250 organisations every month. They also have to do them 12 months of every year. And this process usually takes around 3 hours each month to complete. So if our bot was adopted by every organisation that used ISFE, it would release over 8,500 hours each year spent just copying and pasting, which equates to probably over 300,000 of resource that could be used effectively elsewhere. Over recent months, COVID has put immense pressure on the NHS, both from a clinical and support perspective. Many of the services that we routinely provided had to be put on hold because there just wasn't enough capacity in the system to provide these services, as well as deal with the immediate demands of COVID. And like I've said earlier, NHS processes were just made for automation. And RPA is flexible, which means that the bots can be developed, adapted and shared, and development and maintenance costs can also be shared. This makes RPA an efficient option for the NHS and a way that we can help create more capacity in the system to help recovery from this chronic situation, but also prepare for the next. So if there's anyone who would like to adopt our bot Mickey and try it for yourself, please get in touch. So now back to John to have a look at some of the comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. So yeah, thanks for that overview. And yeah, a couple of questions that have come through. What people would like to automate comes through, which probably no surprise: data inputting, cleaning, and cooking. And Wendy, they want to know where the name Mickey has come from.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to give away my age now, because if anybody was from a certain era, they would remember a child's TV program in the late 70s, early 80s called Metal Mickey, and I'll post a link in the comments, and you can actually see it for yourself.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and what else we've got? Some other ones about routine stuff that people would like to automate, household tasks, which is not surprising. And a couple of questions that come through, which I'll ask. One is that's come through is where we got on there. Yep. Okay. Yeah, is AI going forward? Is AI going to take our jobs? So the answer to that is no, but what it will do, it will augment your roles in the future going forward, and it will give you what people class as superpowers. Give an example of that is using cognitive insights, which Tom's just going to talk about now, giving you the ability to see patterns that you've never seen before. It will make, for example, doctors much smarter than, not saying they're not smart now, but give them what we class as superpowers, new insights. What else have we got? What occupations, roles do we think that will be the least impacted by AI? There's a bit of research that's been done for this, and it's probably come through from Oxford, that says that roles, for example, using creativity, roles that will involve complex social interaction, and also physical manipulation and perception will be those sort of roles will be probably the least affected, because that's something that AI is quite a distance away from in the next few years. So if we hand over now to Tom, who's going to talk about cognitive insight. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you, John. Could you switch to the next slide, Vanessa, please? Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about cognitive insight, and to do so, we're going to look at our Dynamic Pathways tool program that we're working on to hopefully illustrate the point. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So what is cognitive insight? So cognitive insight is the ability to reevaluate thoughts and beliefs in order to make thoughtful conclusions and new conclusions. And it's something that in our lives that we've all done previously, through our school, college and university, everyone on this call will have reevaluated previous ideas that they would have held as truths. But in a work setting, we rarely do this because we lack the time to go back and question things that we've previously learned. So we often build all our conclusions based on our previous learnings and don't reevaluate the information that we know. I personally have been in the NHS for 14 years. Until I really joined the innovation department, I didn't really go back and question my knowledge of things that I'd learned in my first few years in the NHS. But cognitive insight is about reevaluating those beliefs and to make new conclusions going forward. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So an example of this is our DPT program. And we started with a customer brief where they had a really interesting and exciting project where they were joining data across the health service. And the product was working, they were getting good insights on it, but they knew they wanted to innovate, they knew they wanted to get greater insights. And so they approached SCW and said, we want to build on this and expand on this. The challenge was that the view of expanding it was to simply add and amend what was already there. So to extend and increase along the existing innovation lines that they'd already got, and to build on the existing knowledge and preconceptions about how everything worked that they'd already done so far. And what we sort of said to them was, if you do it this way, you will make steps you will move forward, but you'll only move forward along the trajectory that you've already set. And you'll probably get the enhancements that you want, but you'll make a step forward that will leave you in 6 or maybe a year's time with the same challenges that you're experiencing now, where you want to learn more than the position you're already at. And we said to them, we would like to take a different approach. And thankfully, they were really engaged customer. They really wanted to innovate and were happy to sort of go on a bit of a journey with us to try a different technique, try different ways of doing this, and see if it produced a different type of answer and improve their understanding. If you go to the next slide, please, Vanessa. But of course, in order to convince people that you need to change your ways of thinking, we first had to show the problems in the existing knowledge. So the project was about understanding linked healthcare consumption. And we started off with a very rigid pattern of healthcare consumption. And this was something that was known to the customer, known to their teams. This was how healthcare was being consumed in their area. And as you can see, it's very sort of linear. They had a view that an ambulance would drop someone off in A&E, and A&E attendants would go into a non-elective admission, and so forth down the line. And there was a view from everyone that this was a set pattern, that everyone could define it. There was known data quality issues, but they were known, but it was felt that they weren't impacting this ability to understand the pattern that much, that they were in the data, but we can work around them. It's not affecting the conclusions in too big a way. And that because it's a set pattern, it could be manually coded in tools such as SQL and Excel. And of course, we could define a number of pathways. And when we started working with them, we started modeling this data. And we said that we wouldn't take the existing ways of doing the joins, the existing ways of linking the data. We would take a new approach and try and let the system join the data together. And what happened was we kept finding problems and challenges. And sorry, Vanessa, if you could just click the next slide. And what we found was that the system continued to sort of error as it was trying to link the data in the way that the previous analysis has shown it should be linked. And what we found out was that the interactions were actually far more complex than had previously been thought, and that there were outliers in the data because of those data quality issues that were known, but there were data quality issues that were not known. And there were outliers because some patients are just outliers, and patients will go where they need to go, not necessarily where we want them to go or where we design a pathway for them to go in. You know, if someone's sick, they will try and find the quickest way for them to get treated. And what we were able to convince our customer and work with them to adopt is a new way of working, where we said, well, this rigid way of modeling data is not going to give you what you want. And actually, we need to constantly sort of go back to the start, reevaluate everything, and start from the ground up and move forward on that basis. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So what we did was we started out with a set of rules about how the data should join together, and we said that we'd let the system join the data. And when we turned it on, the diagram that you're seeing is what came out of the system. And as you can see, the interactions from the pathways are far more complex than was originally thought. We see interactions from healthcare events that we hadn't necessarily expected or certainly were known and planned. And we found that, as I said previously, that patients were going where they wanted to go or where they needed to go, not necessarily where a commissioning pathway had been set up for them. And then within this sort of mixture, we also found that there were recursions of activity. So patients obviously going round and round inside A&E, but patients bouncing along different lines. So going round and round in A&E, go into 111, and going round and round in 111, and vice versa. Now, this was a huge step forward for us in understanding the pathways. But as we sort of convinced our customer that we should seek to learn as much as we can all the time, and that we should constantly be looking to improve our understanding, we continue to let the system learn and create new pathways. And Vanessa, if you could click forward for me, please. And yeah, thank you. And the diagram that's just popped up is the same data, but how we understand it today. And as you can see, the interactions now are far more complex. We understand more about the pathways and the journeys that patients are on. And if we just stopped at the first phase, we would have had a step forward. But again, we're limiting ourselves, and we wouldn't be closer to understanding the whole real world scenario. And that diagram now, the new one, that's still not complete. And as an innovation department, we are constantly working on these, trying to learn, trying to understand more about the pathways, and just accepting that the previous answers are not wrong, but we're learning more and we're improving. And so our goal is to change that model and learn more, and we won't see that as a problem. It's an improvement. You know, the more we learn about the pathways, the greater it is for our customers and for our organization to improve patient care. If you could move to the next slide, please, Vanessa. Okay. So the interactions in the pathways, that's from our integration engine, which is the 4 rectangles there. But as a department and with our customers, we sort of said, well, if we're going to embrace cognitive insights, we need to embrace it in all of the things that we do in this program. And so what we've done is all of the elements of our platform and our program, we try to learn at each point, and the feedback from each of those endpoints we bring back into the system so that we're constantly adapting and evolving the system to improve the outputs from it. And you can see that's right the way from the standardized dashboards and reports through sort of deep dive analysis and session mining and data science. And on the other side, our work on AI services. So we're working with clustering, data mining, and neural nets to try and reevaluate the data, try and find new insights which help us redesign the system and challenge our existing ways of working. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So just to summarize, so our challenge here was that we wanted to understand more about healthcare consumption. We wanted to understand how people were getting onto pathways of care and what variety of pathways there were. There was already an existing tools, but taking a different approach and reevaluating all the things that we previously held as truths and starting again, as it were, we were able to make leaps forward in our understanding of the pathways of care. And then that means that the customer and the health service is able to greater understand the need, greater understand the patient journeys. And this all helps to embrace a population health management approach to healthcare. And so the more we understand about that, the better we can meet the need today and the challenge of the future needs, as John said, about how we deal with the increasing comorbidities. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand you over now to Michael.
Thank you, Tom. So having an innovation team or a trusted innovation partners, that's clearly going to help organisations to provide huge benefits to their organisation and the system and help kind of jump the needle. But we can't leave it all down to a small group of people. We all need to play our part. Someone that really inspires me from an innovation perspective is Dave Brailsford. So Dave Brailsford's the head of British Cycling, and he talks about the power of marginal gains. And if you get 1% better at everything, when you add those benefits together, the gains are much more substantial. And we've seen the success of this. So more than half of the winners of the Tour de France over the last 10 years have been British, and we had some amazing success at the London Olympics. Health and care, we have one of the biggest workforces in the world. So what if all of our people improved the way that they work by 1%? And what is it that stops us from an innovation perspective? I think one of the key things here is that many of us, we don't really understand how we can be innovative in our jobs. And I've certainly been here before when I was doing more of a process control and governance kind of role. And I was asked by my organisation at the time to demonstrate how I'd met the organisational value of being innovative. And I didn't really know how to be innovative and what that really meant for me. And actually, innovation itself can be something that's quite nebulous. We don't really understand what it looks like, and that can make it quite difficult. So I did what lots of technologists do, and I consulted Google. So I'm just going to move on and look at the images that are in the top 10 image searches around innovation, and there's not a single person involved in these images. So the act of innovation is something that's quite difficult to explain, and I can look at these pictures and I can kind of guess what people might take from it. So are you talking about a blockchain distributed ledger? Are you talking about an Internet of Things, or even an inspirational light bulb moment in blue sky thinking? But it's not really that clear, and that can kind of get in the way. But also it means that we put technology on a pedestal as part of the innovation perspective, and that can really get in the way. And that does a number of things, which we'll just kind of move on to on the next slide. So for some people, it means that you don't start. You think of innovation, you immediately go to technology, and you just don't start. It's too hard. You don't have the tools, you don't have the time, or maybe imposter syndrome gets in the way, and you think, no, I'm just gonna leave that alone, and I'm going to carry on doing exactly the things that I've been doing in the past because I know that they work. Some people go the other way. They try and eat the elephant. They try and fix all of the problems. And if we come back to Wendy's RPA example earlier, that was a really good example of breaking a process down, picking a small part of it, improving it, and making that gain. And if you, as part of that 3-piece process, if we improved parts of 1 and 3, we could add those incremental gains up to something that's quite big and substantial. And I think the example in itself, just for that one part, was already substantial. But imagine if you add the other 2 parts on, it could be something really special. But also, there's lots of people can focus on innovation and jump straight to technology just for the sake of it. So you pick the coolest technology. but you forget why you were trying to improve and what you're trying to do, and you forget about the people. And one thing that I think many of us have seen is that technologists really love playing with toys, and sometimes that can send us down to the wrong place. So we build the tech and then we work out what the problem is after, and retrofitting the solution to the problem means we're just fixing work that we've already done but hasn't provided us value, and that's not efficient, and that doesn't really help us move forward as quickly as we need to. But also from a technology perspective, we can kind of think that if we're not the first, that it doesn't count. And reflecting back on John's motor car, you know, many of us in our teenage years, when we got our first car, we weren't the first person to have a car, and we probably weren't the first person to own that particular car. But in terms of the change that it brought to our life and the way that we were able to go about doing the things that we wanted to do, it was significantly improved. So being first shouldn't really get in the way of making changes and making improvements and doing new things. But sometimes we forget to speak to others. We don't learn from the mistakes of others. And actually, if we looked at all the marginal gains that happen across the many hundred NHS organisations across the various regions and exploited them to their own, they would grow to become something very significant. And that's something we really need to make sure that we don't lose, because in health and care, it isn't a real competition. We're all in this for the same purpose. We just happen to operate in slightly different spaces or different geographies. So we've talked about kind of sometimes not really knowing what innovation means, or putting technology as part of innovation on the pedestal gets in the way. So what really is innovation? So we'll just move on to the next slide, and I really simplified it here. It's doing new things in new ways, or bringing in new ideas. And I think if we consider innovation from that perspective, in every single one of us will find that very accessible. So I know I would challenge you to think about the way that you do your job, and is there a better way of doing some of the things that you just do because it's the way that you do it? And one of the things we see a lot in use in the NHS is Kaizen. This kind of translates as good change or continual improvement. So if we think about it in that way and treat innovation as positive change and continual improvement, and being agile and iterating those improvements, then actually when we add those marginal gains and those 1% together, and then apply it over the over 1 million employees that we have across health and care, those benefits are really, really significant. And so how have we kind of applied some of these principles at SCW? I'll just move on kind of really, really briefly. So we've kind of tackled it in a few ways. So from a people perspective, we're really looking at building the professionalism across our digital family, and that's allowing us to embrace the wisdom of people in our own organisation and more broadly that have already done some of those things before. So, for example, we've set up an Agile Guild where teams are learning from other teams that operate in that way and taking the things that they've maybe slipped up on and not making the same mistakes so that they can improve much faster. From a customer perspective, we've spent a lot of time listening and making quite a subtle change to our operating model, but when we've added them together, the impact that they have has been quite significant, and we've received some really positive feedback on that, which is great to see. We've also been looking at kind of the capabilities that we have. So we've done horizon scanning. So we've been looking at user-centered design, which is something that's really key across government digital services, and that's driven significant improvements for the gov.uk services. So we're looking to build that capability so that we can share that with our system partners. And we're also moving on from that, we're taking those user-centered design principles and we're testing them out on ourselves. We're going to learn the lessons and ensure that we're in a place that when that capability is fully in place, we have some real wisdom to share, and we can help our partners to get into much more positive outcomes much faster. And also from a service development perspective, we are taking a much more agile approach, and where John talked about earlier, failing fast, really understanding the outcomes, those sort of things, and giving ourselves the opportunity to learn and improve. So from an informatics perspective, that's really where we've been working around the innovation stuff, but also mainly looking at lots of the marginal gains that we can either make ourselves or we can support our customer partners to achieve. I'm just going to hand back to John.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's great. So yeah, just for the next session, just as we've come into the final run, we thought this is be of interest to everybody else, and it comes into, I think one of the questions in the chat talks about the impact of innovation, and that, you know, industry is being disrupted, and there's an example I think in the chat that says about the travel industry being disrupted, and how do we make small steps within the NHS, we make lots of promises, but how do we create the right environment to achieve this step change? So this is probably leading into that. It got us thinking as a team as well, that, you know, we thought the same thing. How do we create the right environment? And we were thinking about how hospitals are assessed by the CQC on their safety and the benchmarked against best practice. Plus, if you're an organisation and you're looking to become a digital organisation, there's an assessment around digital maturity, and there's gaps that you need to close to plan to improve that. So we thought, what can you do in innovation? So we thought about innovation readiness assessment. And just because you've got innovation in your title or you have an innovation team doesn't necessarily mean you're an innovative organization or supporting it. So what we thought we'd do is we come up with this idea here. And if you go to the next slide, it's just coming up with a readiness assessment, looking at 5 key areas, looking at leadership and the ambition from leadership. You know, have you got clear, visible leadership, and do you support and encourage you know, innovation projects within your organization? And then we're also looking then at the second piece is looking at the structure and the process within the organization. Is it designed to support innovation? And then innovation application, there's cutting edge technology and tools and practices. We talked about lean, we talked about agile. Are these embedded throughout your organization? And then linking in with the people's plan that's come together, what are the new skills of the future? Is the organization investing in developing those skills with people? And I think finally, you know, we can learn a lot working in partnership with industry. We've seen that over COVID, they've really stepped up and helped us together make some amazing advances in sort of agility and delivering sort of innovation within in health. So again, being open to collaboration with industry is absolutely key. So what we thought we'd do is do probably a 5-level score, 1 being just getting started and 5 being experts and it's fully integrated. And what we thought we'd do at this assessment, we're working closely with the NHS benefits network for NHS England and NHSI. So I'd suggest people have a look at that as well. Some really good website there, and they're doing some great work there. Is to do an assessment with this tool to sort of assess from a sort of senior leadership perspective of what innovation is and what parts of innovation are important to them, and then sort of survey the rest of the organization and see where the gaps are. And the idea being is if there's a big gap, we will come up with some evidence to say this is what you should do to hopefully close and narrow down that gap. So more to follow on this, and we'd be delighted for people who are interested in sort of taking this assessment to see how ready they are. But really good question there, and I think it's important that we foster and create the right behaviours environment to foster innovation. So if we go to the next slide, I think we can, before we sort of finalise on some of the takeaways, just to run through some of the questions and just have a look. So one for Tom that's come through anonymously. From a data perspective, Tom, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing SCW's analytics team in the current climate and the future?
Well, that's a big question, that one, John.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest challenges is the formation of the ICSs. So, you know, previously analytics will be focused along sort of historic lines of commissioning, and that going forward, those barriers between commissioners and providers are, you know, disappearing. And so that sort of whole system-wide analysis will need to be sort of the new norm. And I think that's quite a step change from where we are and where lots of organisations are in the health service, in that we've tended to stick within our own areas. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge, probably a bigger challenge than some of the AI stuff that's coming online.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. And I would probably just add, I think from a data perspective, I think data and quality is absolutely fundamental. No amount of, if you're using AI, of our algorithmic sophistication, as they've mentioned with slow, will overcome, you know, the lack of a really good data architecture, and simply bad data can be paralysing to an organisation. So it's going to be data quality, and it's a key component. There's another question that's come through. It says, do you think innovation is somehow knocked out of us as children? We naturally see innovation card. Okay, yep. I believe probably it does. I think it's the way we work. I suppose we're interested in doing our jobs and becoming quicker and efficient. It probably goes through to probably that's something that Frederick Winslow Taylor, I think, of that scientific management approach with Deming of doing things quicker, faster, better. But I think, you know, innovation, you've got to look completely at a different way of doing things. I think it's something we probably do really need to relearn. So yeah, that's a really good question. Another one that's come through is the biggest challenge of getting people to adopt their own healthy behaviour and manage their own condition. We don't have enough tools that are joined up. I'd agree with that. In a person-centered way to assist people. Yep. We need to co-produce, absolutely fundamental, the co-production. I think with all the innovation that we're doing, we do put the customer, the patient, the end user at the center of what we try and do. And talking about the lack of people not being digitally engaged. Yep. So that's absolutely fundamental on there. Another question has come through about COVID. It's showing the importance of inequalities. Yeah. The fear that we may be developing solutions that for people who are not the ones that most need. Yep, that's a really good question, and I think that comes back down to the thing about the feasibility, the viability, the strategic alignment. I think organisations, when they develop apps or digital solutions, they need to go through that cycle again and always ask that question and challenge. We have that healthy challenge within SCW through our innovation and solutions board, but that is a really, really good question. I see Michael has answered that. We've got a question from Tarek. How do you think cognitive insights fits with impacts of culture and organisation, given the culture some of those? Okay. What are the tools and approaches SCW are using with its clients used to ensure cognitive insights is a valuable, conscious process? That's a tough question. Within the context of innovation change, I think it's development in partnership. I think all of these new products and services and tools and, you know, technology that's available, I think we need to do that in partnership with both our sort of customers within the NHS, but also with industry. I think we can learn an awful lot from industry. We at SCW have you know, made leaps and bounds in innovation that's been supported by industry. So there's something about a mutual education from both industry to the NHS and from the NHS to industry. I think if we can do that, we can both up our game together. So I think that's a really good question. Another question that's come through is, how are you proposing to work with voluntary organisations to support them assisting people to take control of their own behaviours? Really good question. So we are working with a number of local authorities across the patch, especially when we're looking at sort of integrated sort of healthcare systems that Tom was talking about and cognitive insights. It's not just healthcare data, it needs to be local authority data. It may be even linking with the police and with government. So we are looking at how we bring those data sets in safely and how we protect people's, you know, privacy. Because when we start looking at some of these areas, you know, privacy and bias is going to be really important, that we don't introduce bias into some of these models that we have. So privacy is number one, bias is number two, and there's something also called replication that we need to be able to explain if we do use AI and new technologies, how we sort of explain what the model is actually doing. So I think, yeah, voluntary sector and organisations like that is absolutely fundamental, and we are looking to bring those parties in, because I think that's where, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, some of the challenges we have, we can't just, people have a perception that health equals healthcare, and it's that wider market of the social determinants. So we are working as hard as possible. The challenge we have there, I think, is some of the data quality and the systems that they're using. So there's something perhaps I think that health can support social care a bit more, and also other areas to bring in their data sets and start doing some analysis on there. So they were some of the questions that came through. If I just sort of move into, I suppose, some of the final takeaways before I sort of cover off just from the speakers. Just some of the sort of takeaways I want to, some of the hard elements and some of the soft elements I think are really important for organisations to consider. And speaking from experience, I think, you know, agreeing on a framework or a model, get an organisational sign up is absolutely fundamental if you can get everybody to do it. But as Michael said, innovation is everybody's role and responsibility. But if you're doing some big, meaty, gnarly problems that you're trying to innovate against, I think using a framework really helps you fail fast, but allows you to pivot quickly. And the benefit of that is you can apply design thinking, which is, you know, the problem needs to be front and center, but it needs to be pervasive. It needs to be absolutely everywhere. And using lean startup, again, you know, concierge service is good enough to show something what a new product or service could look like. And the big thing that I'm a real big fan of is moving towards agile and not waterfall. Waterfall is a bit too restrictive. Agile is a completely different methodology. It supports continuous iteration, allows you to pivot quickly, but make shut something down quickly if it's not delivering the benefit. So really, really, really key. And I think coupled with that, again, having your board or your leadership team assessing each of the ideas for feasibility, viability, desirability, and strategic fit. And I would encourage organizations to really partner and think about what industry can do for healthcare, because I've been really impressed about some of the partners that we are working with. We've got an awful lot to learn from each other, and I think we're in a unique, I suppose, time now to do this. And I think we need to keep that work going. And I think be open to pivoting and experimenting and fail fast. That is quite difficult for organizations because they'll invest in people, staff, resources, and to see a project fail doesn't feel good. But I think they need to be comfortable with that, because we don't fail, we don't learn. So really important. Innovation business models. Again, the way organizations are set up and they're funded, I would question whether some of our business models are right and our operation models. So don't just look at innovation from products and services and solutions. Look at the way the business models are set up and do that. And then finally, I think assess your readiness. So we'll be really interested in people who are really keen to sign up with us to start testing this survey that we're trying to develop with the benefits network with NHS England and I. So I think that's a really good boost, because it'd be great to build up a bank of what good looks like that we can compare ourselves and coach each other. And then finally, I think the soft elements, it doesn't go out saying these are really powerful. And I think from a leadership perspective, giving people the empowerment, the legitimacy to act on an idea is really key, fundamental. But from an innovation perspective, the bullet point there that says go on a love campaign, what I mean by that is remember that sometimes when you're introducing innovation into an organization, you are challenging the way people deliver their day-to-day services. They're very passionate about what they do. They've probably been on that efficiency model of improving. So feel really passionate about what they do every day. And remember that you don't know everything, and be very humble. Learn about their area. We don't in innovation know everything, so you've got to really understand first before you can sort of try and help. And I think I wouldn't sort of underestimate the ability of listening. It goes hand in hand with our customers. Again, they're looking to do new things, introduce new ways of working across their health economy, but we have to really listen before we speak and try and sort of solutionize. It's very easy for organizations to say, well, I think you need this, but speak to as many people as you can and get buy-in. And I think what was really important for me, I think, is what Michael said at the end as well, is important that innovation is everybody's job. And you mentioned about Kaizen and the importance of using that with probably quality improvement. And it's not really an innovation until it's landed. We can do great work, but until it lands and actually sort of demonstrates and brings new benefit, I don't think we've made a difference. So keeping everybody on that sort of trajectory, I think, is absolutely fundamental as well. I'm just looking to see, is there any other questions before I sort of sign off? Many innovations. Yes, we've got one from Zach. It says many innovations throughout history have come about by accidents. Yep. How can we encourage experimentation and encourage risk taking? Failures inevitably happen. Great question. And I think it goes back to what I was saying is organizations being comfortable that, I mean, give you an example. I think Bosch used that model that I described about the funnel of ideas that they have and taking, a number of ideas into creating a sort of a £100 million company. And how they do that, they run through that same model I just described. But at least when you fail, if you've gone through that first phase gate and you've built your concierge service and it still doesn't work, having the ability to say, well, no, we'll kill it, but the learning you take to your next innovation that you do. So there's something about being able to learn, fail, recycle that learning, and the more that you do that, the opportunities for getting something to that third stage and sort of industrializing it at scale becomes much better. So it's something I think really, how do we become more comfortable with that? It's educating our executive about failure, but making sure that it's failure within a context that's really tightly controlled, but gives people the legitimacy to act in a sort of an agile manner. So before I sort of sign off, I just wanted to just do a quick circle around from my colleagues. So Tom, is there anything from yourself that you'd like to say?
No, John, you've covered everything that I wanted to say, so thank you.
Right, thank you. Michael?
No, just thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Great, thank you. Wendy? Oh, I think we lost Wendy there.
No, I've done. I do it every day at least once. I was on mute. No, not for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Great. Yeah, and just a big thank you to Nikki Tucker for her support today setting this up, and to Vanessa as well. But great team helping us get this off the ground. And I hope you found the session really sort of intuitive, and also you got some really good takeaways. But I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And before you go, if you could, in the chat, if you're able to, just give us some quick comments back. Did we cover the right areas? Was this event what you were hoping to hear, and is there anything else we can do going forward? But really, great to hear your feedback on there. And also, this will be on demand on video, and it'll be available shortly on our website. So I think from me, and I think we're hopefully on time, which is probably a first for me, so that is something I need to remember. But I just want to thank our panel for today and for their input, and thanks everybody for joining the call, and look forward to speaking to you in the future. Thank you, everybody. Bye.